The rain fell in a relentless torrent, each drop striking the metal rooftops of the sprawling city with a sharp, metallic ping. The sound echoed through the labyrinthine streets below, mingling with the distant hum of anti-grav vehicles and the faint crackle of neon signs that bathed the alleyways in an eerie, shifting glow. Somewhere in the depths of this urban jungle, where the air was thick with the scent of oil and ozone, a girl crouched in the shadows, her breath slow and steady, despite the chaos around her. She wasn't like the others who scurried through these streets, desperate to survive another day. No, she had long since stopped being afraid. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not on a world like Raskova 9, a death world, as the off-worlders called it. A planet so hostile, so unforgiving, that only the strongest, the smartest, and the most ruthless could hope to endure. And she was all three. Her name was Kaela, though no one had called her that in years. Names were for people who mattered, people who had someone to remember them. She was just a shadow now, a ghost that moved unseen through the cracks of the city. But tonight, she wasn't hiding. Tonight, she was hunting. The soft scrape of boots on wet pavement reached her ears, and she tilted her head slightly, listening. Two sets of footsteps, moving cautiously but with purpose. They thought they were being quiet, but Kaela had spent her entire life honing her senses. She could hear the subtle hitch in their breathing, the faint clink of metal weapons against their belts. Mercenaries, hired guns sent to track her down. She smiled to herself, a cold, feral grin that didn't reach her eyes. They had no idea what they were walking into. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until she could see their silhouettes outlined against the flickering light of a malfunctioning street lamp. One of them was tall and broad-shouldered, his movements heavy and deliberate. The other was leaner, quicker, his head swiveling nervously as he scanned the shadows. Amateurs. They hadn't even noticed the puddles she'd deliberately disturbed, leading them right to this dead-end alley. Kaela waited until they were almost upon her before she moved. A single, fluid motion brought her out of the darkness, her blade glinting in the dim light. The taller man barely had time to register her presence before she was on him, her knife slicing cleanly across his throat. The sound was wet and gurgling, quickly drowned out by the rain. The leaner mercenary reacted faster, drawing his weapon and firing off a shot that sizzled past her ear. But Kaela was already moving, darting to the side and closing the distance between them. He swung at her with the butt of his rifle, but she ducked under the blow, driving her blade into his side with a brutal efficiency. He gasped, his knees buckling as he crumpled to the ground. Kaela stood over him, her expression unreadable as she wiped the blood from her knife on his jacket. She didn't feel satisfaction or guilt, only a grim sense of inevitability. This was the way of things on Raskova 9. Kill or be killed. And Kaela had no intention of dying. The city seemed to hold its breath for a moment, the rain softening to a gentle patter, as if mourning the lives she had just taken. But Kaela didn't linger. She slipped back into the shadows, her movements as silent and precise as a predator stalking its prey. Kaela's earliest memories were a blur of hunger and pain. She had been abandoned as a child, left to fend for herself in the slums of Raskova 9. The orphanages were overcrowded and corrupt, little more than holding pens for children destined to become cannon fodder in the endless wars that plagued the galaxy. Kaela had escaped that fate, but only because she had learned early on how to fight, how to steal, how to survive. She had no family, no friends, no one to rely on but herself. And so she had become a weapon, sharpening herself against the harshness of the world until there was nothing left but steel and resolve. She had learned to fight with whatever she could find. a broken pipe, a shard of glass, even her bare hands. But her favorite weapon was the knife. It was intimate, personal. You couldn't kill someone with a knife without looking them in the eye, without feeling the life drain out of them. It reminded her that every kill was a choice, a decision she made to keep breathing for one more day. Over the years, Kaela had carved out a reputation for herself. She was a ghost, a legend whispered about in hushed tones by those who feared her. Some said she was unkillable, that she had made a pact with the gods of the Deathworld to grant her immortality. Others claimed she was a machine, a remnant of some forgotten war. Kaela let them believe whatever they wanted. The truth was far simpler. She was just better than everyone else. The job came to her through a contact in the black market, a wiry old man with cybernetic eyes that whirred softly as they focused on her. He slid a data chip across the table, his fingers trembling slightly. "High-profile target," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Corporate exec. Word is he's got ties to the syndicate." Kaela raised an eyebrow, slipping the chip into her wrist-mounted reader. The holographic display lit up, showing the face of a middle-aged man with slicked-back hair and a smug smile that made her want to punch him. His name was Joran Kess, CEO of some off-world mining corporation. According to the dossier, he was responsible for displacing thousands of workers, leaving them to starve while he raked in profits. Typical corporate scum. "What's the catch?" she asked, her tone flat. The old man hesitated, his mechanical eyes flickering. "He's got security. Top of the line. Rumor has it, he's even got a couple of augmented bodyguards," Kaela smirked. "Is that supposed to scare me?" The old man shook his head. "Just be careful. There's a lot of money riding on this." Kaela leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. "How much?" "Enough to get you off this rock for good." That gave her pause. She had never seriously considered leaving Raskova 9. It was her home, as much as she hated it. But the thought of starting over somewhere else, somewhere clean and quiet, it was tempting. "I'll take it," she said finally, standing up and pulling her hood over her head. "Send me the details." The mansion was a fortress, perched high above the city on a cliff that overlooked the toxic sea. Its walls were lined with automated turrets, and the air shimmered with the faint distortion of an energy shield. Kaela studied it from a distance, her sharp eyes picking out the patterns in the patrols, the blind spots in the defenses. She had spent days preparing for this, gathering intel and mapping out her approach. Now, it was time to act. She moved under cover of darkness, scaling the cliff with the ease of someone who had spent her entire life climbing and crawling through the ruins of the city. Her gloves were reinforced with microspikes, giving her a firm grip on the slick, jagged rocks. Below her, the waves crashed against the shore, their roar muffled by the wind. Reaching the top, she paused to catch her breath, her chest rising and falling steadily. The guards were close, their voices carrying faintly on the breeze. She waited until they passed before slipping over the edge, landing silently on the grass. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows glowing with warm, golden light. It looked almost inviting, but Kaela knew better. Inside, there would be cameras, sensors, traps designed to catch anyone foolish enough to try and break in. But Kaela wasn't just anyone. She bypassed the main entrance, instead finding a maintenance hatch hidden behind a cluster of ornamental bushes. It was locked, of course, but locks were no obstacle to her. She pulled a small device from her belt, attaching it to the keypad. It hummed softly, its lights blinking in rapid succession before the lock clicked open. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, smelling faintly of disinfectant. The halls were lined with sleek, modern furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Kaela moved quickly but carefully, her footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. She avoided the main corridors, sticking to the shadows and using her wrist scanner to disable any security system she encountered. Finally, she reached the executive suite. The door was heavy and reinforced, but Kaela had come prepared. She placed a small charge against the lock, stepping back as it hissed and sparked before falling away. Pushing the door open, she stepped inside. Joran Kess was waiting for her. He sat behind a massive desk, his hands folded neatly in front of him. His bodyguards flanked him, their augmented limbs gleaming in the dim light. They were big, heavily armed, and clearly itching for a fight. Kaela smiled, her knife already in her hand. "Let's dance." The room was silent for a heartbeat, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself had turned to steel. The only sound was the faint hum of the energy shield generators embedded in the walls, a low, omnipresent vibration that Kaela barely registered. Her focus was on the two bodyguards, augmented brutes with cybernetic arms and legs, their glowing red eyes locked onto her like targeting reticles. One of them stepped forward, his voice distorted by a vocal modulator. "You've made a mistake coming here, girl." Kaela tilted her head, her lips curling into a smirk. "Funny. I was just about to say the same thing." The first bodyguard lunged at her, moving faster than any unaugmented human could. His massive fist swung toward her head, but Kaela was already in motion, ducking under the blow and spinning to the side. The air whistled as his punch missed her by inches, slamming into the wall behind her with enough force to crack the reinforced paneling. Kaela didn't give him a chance to recover. She darted forward, her knife flashing in the dim light as she drove it into the exposed joint of his shoulder. Sparks erupted from the wound, and the bodyguard let out a guttural roar, swinging his other arm wildly in an attempt to swat her away. But Kaela was too quick, twisting out of his reach and landing a second strike to the back of his knee. He collapsed with a crash, his augmented legs sparking and twitching as he struggled to get back up. The second bodyguard moved in, raising a plasma rifle that hummed ominously as it charged. Kaela dove behind the desk just as the weapon fired, a searing bolt of energy scorching the air where she had been standing moments before. The blast struck the wall, leaving a smoking crater in its wake. Joran Kess watched the chaos unfold from his chair, his expression one of detached amusement. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "But you're out of your depth. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Kaela didn't respond. She was already calculating her next move, her mind racing as she assessed the situation. The bodyguards were powerful, but they were also predictable, relying on brute strength and advanced tech to overwhelm their opponents. Kaela, on the other hand, thrived on unpredictability. She grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk, a sleek, metallic sphere, and hurled it at the second bodyguard. It struck him square in the face, momentarily disorienting him and giving her the opening she needed. She vaulted over the desk, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. Before he could react, she drove her knife into the soft tissue beneath his jaw, pushing upward until the blade pierced his neural implant. His glowing red eyes flickered and went dark, and he crumpled to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut. The first bodyguard was back on his feet, his damaged arm hanging limply at his side. He roared in fury, charging at her with reckless abandon. Kaela sidestepped his attack, using his own momentum against him as she tripped him and sent him crashing into the desk. The impact shattered the glass surface, sending shards flying in every direction. Kaela didn't hesitate. She climbed onto his back, grabbing a shard of broken glass and driving it into the base of his skull. He spasmed once, then went still, his augmented limbs falling limp. The room fell silent again, save for the sound of Kaela's ragged breathing. She straightened, wiping the blood and oil from her hands onto her pants. Her knife was still in her grip, its blade gleaming wickedly as she turned her attention to Joran Kess. The CEO had risen from his chair, his smug demeanor replaced by a look of genuine fear. He backed away slowly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Wait, wait, we can talk about this. Whatever they're paying you, I'll double it. Triple it!" Kaela's expression didn't change. She advanced on him, her movements slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring the hunt. "This isn't about money," she said, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. "This is about balance." Kess stumbled, nearly tripping over the edge of the ruined desk. "Balance? What are you talking about?" Kaela stopped in front of him, her knife resting lightly against his throat. "You've spent your life taking from people, their homes, their livelihoods, their futures. You thought you could do it without consequences. But everything has a price." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against the blade. "Please, I can make it right. I'll donate to charity. I'll step down. Just don't—" His words were cut off by a sharp, wet gurgle as Kaela drew the blade across his throat in one swift motion. Blood sprayed across the pristine white carpet, pooling around his lifeless body as he crumpled to the floor. Kaela stood over him, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. For a moment, she felt nothing. No triumph, no regret. Just the familiar emptiness that always followed a kill. She wiped her knife clean on his jacket, then turned and walked away without a backward glance. The city was quiet as Kaela made her way back to her hideout, the rain having finally stopped. The streets were slick and reflective, the neon lights casting distorted patterns on the wet pavement. She moved through the shadows like a wraith, her footsteps silent and her presence unnoticed. When she reached her small, cluttered apartment, she locked the door behind her and sank into the battered chair by the window. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving her feeling hollow and exhausted. She stared out at the city, her gaze distant as she replayed the events of the night in her mind. She had done what she set out to do. Another corrupt tyrant had fallen, another small victory in a war that never seemed to end. But the weight of it all pressed heavily on her shoulders, a constant reminder of the life she had chosen. Or perhaps the life that had chosen her. Kaela leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes as the sounds of the city washed over her. She knew there would be more jobs, more enemies to face, more throats to cut. It was the only life she knew, the only life she could imagine. And as much as she hated it, she couldn't deny the truth. She was good at it. And on a world like Raskova 9, being good at killing was the only thing that mattered. Kaela's apartment was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a flickering holoscreen mounted on the wall. It cycled through muted news reports, headlines scrolling across the bottom in glowing text. Corporate CEO found dead in suspected syndicate hit. Violence escalates in Raskova 9 slums. Authorities pledge crackdown on black market activity. She didn't pay attention to the words. The news was always the same. Death, corruption, chaos. It was the background noise of her existence, as constant and unchanging as the hum of the city outside. She reached for the bottle of synth whiskey on the table beside her, pouring herself a glass with steady hands. The amber liquid caught the light, shimmering like molten gold. She sipped it slowly, savoring the burn as it slid down her throat. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax, to let the tension drain from her body. But the reprieve was short-lived. Her wrist-mounted comm unit buzzed softly, its green indicator light blinking insistently. Kaela sighed, setting the glass down and tapping the device. A holographic projection sprang to life, displaying the face of her black market contact, the wiry old man with cybernetic eyes. His expression was grim, his mechanical irises whirring as they focused on her. "You're not going to like this," he said without preamble. Kaela leaned back in her chair, one eyebrow arching. "I rarely do." "What is it?" "There's been fallout from the Kess job. Word's spreading fast. The syndicate's pissed. They think you're trying to muscle in on their territory." Kaela snorted, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Let them think what they want. I don't answer to the syndicate." The old man shook his head, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's not just talk, Kaela. They've put a bounty on your head, high enough to attract every merc, bounty hunter, and desperate lowlife on this planet." Her smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. She had expected retaliation. There were always consequences to taking out someone as high-profile as Joran Kess. But a syndicate bounty was a different beast entirely. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about staying one step ahead of an entire world that wanted her dead. "How much?" she asked, her tone flat. "Enough to make even your friends consider turning you in," the old man replied. "You need to lay low for a while. Get off-world if you can." Kaela's jaw tightened. She hated running. It went against everything she stood for. But she wasn't stupid. She knew when the odds were stacked too heavily against her. "I'll handle it," she said finally, cutting the connection before the old man could respond. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Kaela dismantled her hideout, packing only the essentials: weapons, credits, and a few pieces of tech she couldn't replace. She burned anything that could tie her to the location, watching impassively as the flames consumed the remnants of her life. By the time she was done, there was nothing left but ash and smoke. Her plan was simple: get to the spaceport, secure passage off-world, and disappear into the vastness of the galaxy. But simplicity didn't mean ease. The syndicate would have eyes everywhere, and the bounty hunters would be relentless. Every step of the journey would be a fight for survival. Kaela moved through the city like a phantom, avoiding the main thoroughfares and sticking to the maze-like network of alleys and tunnels that crisscrossed beneath the surface. She kept her hood pulled low, her knife within easy reach. The streets were alive with danger, every shadow a potential threat. As she approached the outskirts of the industrial district, she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. A sixth sense honed by years of living on the edge. She slowed her pace, her eyes scanning the area for signs of trouble. The air was heavy with the acrid stench of burning fuel, and the distant clang of machinery echoed through the empty streets. Then she saw them. A group of figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by masks and helmets. There were 5 of them, each armed with a mix of energy rifles and melee weapons. Their leader, a tall man with a cybernetic arm, stepped forward, his weapon trained on her. "Kaela Vren," he said, his voice distorted by his helmet's vocal modulator. "You've got quite the price on your head." Kaela didn't respond. She sized them up quickly, noting their stances, their weapons, the way they moved. They weren't amateurs, but they weren't syndicate elites either. Mercenaries, most likely, drawn by the promise of a quick payday. The leader took another step closer, his weapon humming ominously. "Surrender now, and we'll make it quick. Fight, and you'll wish you hadn't." Kaela's lips curved into a cold smile. "You should have brought more men." The leader barely had time to react before she moved. In a blur of motion, she drew her knife and threw it with deadly precision. The blade struck one of the mercenaries in the throat, dropping him instantly. Chaos erupted as the others opened fire, their energy bolts sizzling through the air. Kaela darted to the side, using the cover of a rusted shipping container to evade the barrage. She grabbed a discarded length of pipe from the ground, wielding it like a makeshift staff as she charged the nearest mercenary. He swung his rifle at her, but she ducked under the blow, driving the pipe into his ribs with enough force to crack bone. He collapsed with a grunt, clutching his side. The remaining 3 mercenaries regrouped, their movements coordinated as they tried to flank her. Kaela stayed one step ahead, using the terrain to her advantage. She vaulted over debris, slipped through narrow gaps, and struck with ruthless efficiency. One by one, they fell, until only the leader remained. He was breathing heavily now, his confidence replaced by desperation. He fired wildly, the energy bolts sparking off the walls as Kaela closed the distance between them. She disarmed him with a swift strike to his wrist, sending his weapon clattering to the ground. Before he could recover, she had him pinned against the wall, her knife pressed to his throat. "Who sent you?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. The man hesitated, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on her. "You know who," he said finally. "The Syndicate doesn't forgive." Kaela's grip tightened on the knife. "Then, deliver a message for me." Without another word, she slashed his cheek, leaving a deep, bloody gash. He cried out in pain, clutching his face as she released him. "Tell them I'm coming," she said coldly, "and tell them to send better men next time." She turned and walked away, leaving him alive but broken. She didn't look back. By the time Kaela reached the spaceport, dawn was breaking over the city. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the smog, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The massive freighters and sleek starships loomed like silent giants, their hulls gleaming in the pale light. Kaela blended into the crowd of travelers and workers, her hood pulled low to conceal her face. She had already secured passage on a cargo ship bound for the outer colonies, a place where the Syndicate's reach was weaker, where she could regroup and plan her next move. As she boarded the ship, she felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anticipation, and a simmering anger that refused to fade. The Syndicate had made a mistake by coming after her. They thought they could crush her, silence her, erase her from existence. But Kaela Vren wasn't so easily erased. She settled into the cramped quarters of the cargo hold, her knife resting on her lap. The hum of the ship's engines filled the air as it prepared for takeoff. Kaela closed her eyes, her mind already racing with possibilities. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the galaxy, her enemies were waiting to die.